I didn't move to what Pine Hollow for neighbors. I moved there for silence. The kind that only comes when you're far enough from traffic, from city lights, from memories. My house sat at the edge of the development, a modest single-story with a wide front porch and a sloped yard that gave way to a stand of ponderosa pines. And just beyond that, a winding gravel-covered road that most folks didn't even notice, but I noticed it every time I stepped onto my back deck. It was the first thing I saw, snaking between the trees, weaving through the ridge line like a scar the earth had tried to forget. But I couldn't forget, not that road. I'd driven a fire engine down paths like that more times than I cared to count. I'd used roads like that to save lives. And once to lose a friend I never talk about. The gravel, the slope, the angle of the bend before it drops down into the canyon. It was a fire access road designed decades ago by city engineers who understood the terrain. It had no curb appeal, no decorative pavers, no lighting, just raw, ugly function. The kind of ugly that saves people. I didn't say much at first. When the HOA president, a woman named Cynthia Brower, all pastel linen and clipped diction, came around with a welcome packet, I kept my nod polite and my comments minimal. She noticed the fire road from my yard and said, "Shame about that thing. We've been talking about putting in wild flowers or a nature mural to soften the view." "Don't," I said. She blinked, smile faltering for half a second. "I'm sorry. That's a fire access road," I said, gesturing with the beer in my hand. "You block that, you block people's only way out if the canyon burns." She let out a tight little laugh. "Oh, I think our landscaping committee would plan around anything like that. Besides, we have the main road for emergencies." I just looked at her, said nothing more. I didn't mention the fact that I'd been a district captain in the state's fire department for 26 years. I didn't mention that I'd personally helped map that access road with topographic overlays after the '98 firestorms, or that I still had a copy of the original municipal plans showing its designation as a protected emergency corridor. I wasn't ready to get involved. I came here to live out quiet days, to sit with the ghosts that followed me and let them grow quieter too. But that road, it kept calling my attention like a sore tooth. Every time I saw kids playing by it, or someone letting their dog run loose across it, it tense. I started noticing little things, an HOA newsletter mentioning a beautification plan for the outer perimeters, a board meeting note about trail enhancements and eliminating redundant paths. Redundant, that word echoed. I finally walked the full length of the road one afternoon in late April. It was overgrown in spots. Yes, brush had crept over the edges and one corner where the slope dropped had eroded slightly, but it was passable. And more importantly, it was still vital. From the ridge behind my property, it wound down into a secondary road that eventually met County Route 17. If the main access ever got blocked from a fallen tree, an accident or worse, this was the escape hatch. I emailed the HOA, polite at first. Attached documents, maps, even a few pictures from public archives showing the road during past fire seasons. No response. I followed up, still nothing. Then came the HOA spring newsletter, and there it was, a final rendering of the beautification zone, which included my back ridge and a note about native plant installations and privacy rock features, right where the fire access road ran. I stared at the image for a long time, that ugly pressure rising in my chest, the one I used to get before briefing my team ahead of high wind days. I attended the next board meeting. They held it in a little rec center at the front of the development, folding chairs, bottled water, and a projector that kept flickering out. I stood near the back for most of it, wading through agenda items about fencing standards and neighborhood holiday decor. Then it was time for new business. I raised my hand. Cynthia saw me and something in her eyes flashed. She didn't like that I'd come. I introduced myself. Retired fire captain, new resident homeowner at Lot 47. Then I opened my folder. I laid out everything of fire risk projections for our region, federal emergency routing guidelines, The legal status of fire access roads in suburban developments. I passed out a few highlighted pages. Some of the board members listened. A few even looked concerned, but Cynthia smiled through the whole thing. "Thank you for your passion, Mr. Rowlands," she said when I finished. "We appreciate your service, but I think you may be overestimating the risks. Our landscaping team has reviewed the site thoroughly, and we're confident it will improve both property values and community cohesion." I kept my voice even. Improving property values doesn't mean a damn thing if people can't get out alive. The room went silent. She leaned forward. "Well, then we'll just have to trust the main roads to do their job. I don't think a few decorative stones are going to start a wildfire." That wasn't what I'd said, and she knew it. I left the meeting before they voted. I didn't need to see the outcome. I'd seen that look in her eyes, the one that said, "You're not part of the plan." Here, back at home, I walked to the edge of my yard, stood near the road as twilight settled in. It was quiet, the kind of hush that made the pines whisper above. I could still feel the weight of a fire helmet on my head, even though it had been years since I'd worn one. I could still remember the color of flame on dry pine needles, how fast it moved when the wind turned, how no one ever thinks it'll come for them until it's too late. I looked at that fire road, and for the first time since retiring, I felt that pulse again. Not adrenaline, not fear, a warning. By the time summer came, the fire road had vanished from the HOA's maps. Not literally, the gravel still lay where it always had, bleached pale by the sun, thin weeds pushing up through the edges. But in the eyes of the board, it had ceased to exist. It was just an unused path, an unregulated trail, a neglected eyesore, sitting between a half-dozen million-dollar homes and their carefully curated backyards. And they wanted it gone. It started small. A few new signs went up around the neighborhood, branded with the HOA's new slogan, "Pine Hollow." Proud, they looked harmless enough, green script on faux wooden plaques, mounted at intersections and trail heads. Then came the landscaping crews. The first time I saw them out back, I thought they were just clearing brush. A few young guys in orange vests were trimming low branches near the ridge. I walked out with a cup of coffee in hand and called down, "Who hired you?" One of them, a kid maybe 22 at most, looked up. "HOA, were clearing space for boulders." Boulders, privacy feature, decorative rock wall. It's supposed to wrap around from the east cul-de-sac down to the canyon bend, right where the fire access road ran. I didn't argue with the kid. He was just doing a job. But as soon as I got back inside, I fired off another email, this time not just to the HOA board, but to the H-Town zoning office and fire marshal's department. I attached the same maps. I quoted local ordinances. I included photos taken that morning. I didn't get a reply from the HOA, but I did hear back from the zoning office a week later, a short message. "Thank you, Mr. Rowlands, we'll look into this." That was it. Meanwhile, the boulders arrived. Massive things, each weighing close to 2 tons. They were delivered by flatbed and offloaded with a backhoe that tore up the edge of the slope. I watched for my deck jaw clenched as the crew arranged them in a staggered pattern that looked suspiciously like a barrier. They left just enough space between each one to pretend it wasn't a blockade. Technically, you could walk through the gaps, but no emergency vehicle, no fire truck, no ambulance, not even a small utility ATV could make it through without taking damage or getting stuck. They'd call it art. I knew it for what it was, and I wasn't the only one. About 2 days after the boulders were set, I got a knock on my door. It was Lenora Higgins, mid-60s, sharp eyes, mother of 4, HOA board member. But unlike the rest of them, she actually listened. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. I nodded and led her into the kitchen. We didn't sit. She didn't want coffee. She went straight to the point. "I think you're right about the road," she said, "and I think they know it too." "Then why are they doing this?" She hesitated. "Because Cynthia wants full control of the perimeter. There's talk of building a private garden path through the canyon. They want to brand it as a Pine Hollow nature sanctuary. It'll raise the neighborhood's profile. New brochure is already in the works. They're blocking a critical evacuation route for a walking trail. She gave a tired shrug. It's politics. People don't think wildfires will reach this far in. They will. I believe you, she said, then added softly. But they don't care, not unless it burns. She left me with a heavy heart. Lenora might have been on the board, but she was already being pushed aside by the newer members, the ones who wanted uniform lawns, zero tolerance on mailbox colors, and designer hedges shaped like deer. I could see in her face that she'd fought her fight and lost. The next HOA newsletter came in glossy print, full color spread, page 3, perimeter beautification begins. It included an artist's rendering of a walking path where the fire road once was complete. With flower beds and butterfly benches, I felt like I was losing my mind. They were erasing the only functional exit and calling it progress. I printed out a copy of the Federal Fire Access Standards and walked it to the HOA office, a converted model home near the front gate. I handed it to a teenage receptionist who promised to pass it along. I didn't hear anything after that until a week later when I got a letter, hand-delivered, folded neatly into my mailbox without a stamp. It was from the board, a cease and desist. Dear Mr. Rowlands, we appreciate your concern regarding the easement near your property. However, your continued interference with ongoing HOA-approved landscaping efforts may constitute a breach of covenant, including but not limited to verbal disruption of contractors, unauthorized surveillance, and hostile demeanor toward board members. Please be advised that any further action taken by you regarding the area in question will result in legal escalation. I laughed out loud when I read it. Hostile demeanor surveillance. All I'd done was take pictures, but I knew what this was: intimidation. They wanted to shut me up, isolate me, make me the problem neighbor, and part of me wanted to let it go, to retreat, to pull down the blinds and forget the world outside. But I couldn't. That road had a weight to it, not just in the gravel or the grade, but in what it represented: escape, memory, a way through when there's no time left. And I had seen what happens when people don't have a way out. I kept watching the ridge every day. I took photos, logged activity, noticed when the soil around the boulders began to shift, erosion caused by heavy spring rains. No one on the board noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. One morning I saw two kids walking their bikes along the top path. One tripped over a loose stone where a wheel rutted. They laughed, shook it off, but I imagined what that path would look like in the dark, in a hurry, with flames behind you and smoke in your lungs. And I thought, this isn't just neglect anymore. This is negligence, and it was only a matter of time before the mountain reminded everyone why that road was there in the first place. I knew the brush was too dry by mid-June. The rains that usually soaked the foothills in spring had barely come this year, and already the ground crackled underfoot like brittle parchment. The trees wore a gray-green exhaustion I recognized from past seasons, overripe for ignition. It wasn't a question of if, just when. I sat through another HOA meeting that month, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't look away anymore. This one was better attended than usual, maybe 20 residents in the community room, fanning themselves with pamphlets and sipping lemon water while Cynthia stood beneath the flickering projector. She wore a peach blazer that matched her lipstick. Her voice was syrupy, her tone practiced. We're happy to report that Phase 2 of the perimeter beautification project is ahead of schedule, she announced, clicking to the next slide. The nature path along the southern ridge is being finalized with native plantings, and by early July, we'll begin installation of the decorative fencing. I raised my hand. Cynthia paused mid-sentence, her eyes lingering on me with polite disdain. Yes, Mr. Rowlands, that fencing. Does it go across the old fire access road? There was a soft murmur from the other homeowners. Most didn't even know such a road existed, but a few did. One man in the back nodded slowly. Lenora, sitting 2 chairs away from me, sat still, her hands clenched in her lap. Cynthia smiled. The fencing will follow the design approved by the landscaping committee. It's meant to guide foot traffic and prevent erosion. Is that a yes? I'm not sure why you're asking again, Mr. Rowlands. This has already been addressed because you're sealing off the only secondary egress from the South Ridge. A woman across the aisle whispered something to her husband. I took a breath. That path was built for emergency use, if the canyon catches fire and the main road gets blocked, which it has before. By the way, you'll need that road to evacuate. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. Cynthia's smile never faltered. We appreciate your concern, of course, but our community is fully compliant with local safety ordinances. Compliance doesn't mean survival. Her smile vanished just for a flicker. Mr. Rowland, she said, you've made your position clear in past meetings, in emails, and through what I would call aggressive messaging to city departments. We've reviewed the matter thoroughly. The board has made its decision. The room was quiet. I nodded once, folded my notes, and stood up. Then let it be on record that I warned you. That's someone with 26 years in fire service, including regional disaster coordination, told you exactly what would happen and you dismissed it. There were people watching me now with uneasy interest. Some shifted in their seats. One man with a toddler in his lap looked down at his shoes, but Cynthia just said, noted, thank you. As I left, I passed by the refreshments table. One of the younger board members, a guy named Doug, with sunburned cheeks and too much cologne, muttered under his breath, someone's got too much time in retirement. I stopped, looked at him. You know how fast a fire can cross dry grass at 20 knots of wind? I asked, not raising my voice. He blinked. 15 seconds, that's how long you'd have to grab your kid before your breathing flame. He turned pale. I walked out before anyone else said a word. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with an old binder I hadn't opened in years. Fire maps, dispatch call sheets, photographs from deployments I wished I could forget. My hands moved without thinking, piecing together the route from Pine Hollow to the canyon base, then up to the emergency exit on County Route 17. I highlighted the backup road, the one they just blocked. The next morning I mailed a certified packet to the local fire marshal's office. Then I called in a favor, not one I was proud of using but a necessary one. Chief Morales had once been my trainee. Now he ran the regional division. He picked up after 2 rings. Cal. Hey, Chief, I said, got a problem in Pine Hollow. You got 10 minutes. Is it about that fire access you emailed us about? It's about the fact that the HOA just sealed it off. I laid it all out. The concrete blocks, the fencing, the false compliance. Morales was quiet for a beat. We flagged that area as low priority last year, he said finally. Newer developments usually fall under their own liability umbrellas. This one doesn't. I've seen the plans, and when this place goes, not if it's going to go fast. There's too much fuel in the draw, too much slope for a clean escape. I'll send an inspector, he said unofficially. But I can't make promises. Don't need promises, just need daylight. 2 days. Later, I watched a marked fire vehicle crawl up the road and stop outside my property. A man in uniform got out, took photos, walked the gravel. He nodded to me but said nothing. The next morning I got a voicemail from Morales. Instincts were right, Cal, he said, but the HOA's got paperwork, permits signed by someone in zoning. Looks like a rush job. You'll need a city council appeal if you want it reversed. I thanked him and hung up another wall, but that didn't mean I'd stop. I started printing flyers, not dramatic ones, just simple, factual notices. Did you know this Ridge Road is a registered fire access route? It is now blocked by HOA construction. If the main road is inaccessible during a fire, there will be no approved exit path from the southern side of Pine Hollow. Ask your board why. I left them on community bulletin boards, in mailboxes, even at the local coffee shop. The HOA responded by sending out a rebuttal memo, claiming the flyers were alarmist and unauthorized. Cynthia even posted in the neighborhood Facebook group calling me a disgruntled retiree trying to sow fear. I didn't reply because fear wasn't the problem. It was ignorance and worse, arrogance. They thought the mountain owed them obedience, that the trees cared about property values, that they're rock gardens. And picnic areas would hold back a wall of flame when the wind came howling down the ridge, but I knew better, and every time I smelled dry pine on the breeze, my gut clenched with that old familiar certainty. Something was coming. The first time I saw the concrete posts, I thought maybe they were survey markers. They stood like gray teeth lined up in a staggered arc across the mouth of the fire road, just at the edge of my property's rear fence. I walked out to them, boots crunching on gravel, heart sinking with every step. They weren't survey posts. They weren't temporary. They were foundation anchors, thick rebar running through their cores. Already set in concrete, already dry. A few feet behind them, workers were unspooling fencing wire, thick gauge. Triple wound, the kind used to keep livestock from wandering or people from passing. "Hey," I called out. "Who signed off on this?" The foreman looked up. Young guy, maybe 30, in a safety vest and mirrored sunglasses. HOA directive. He said, "Perimeter security. That's a fire access road." He shrugged. "Not my problem. We're just here to install the barrier." Barrier? He said it like it meant nothing. Just a job, another line. And a work order. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I walked the length of the posts instead, kicking at the bases. Testing how deep they went. Deep enough to hold. Too deep to remove easily. It would take a jackhammer to pull them up now, or a damn wildfire. By afternoon, the crew had finished stringing the fencing. It ran tight between the concrete anchors and connected to a newly installed gate system, padlocked. Steel, unmarked. No signage, no emergency access box, just a cold metal line that cut off the road like an amputation. I stood at the edge for a long time, arms crossed, staring at what had once been a lifeline. A hawk circled overhead. The trees beyond were still. Too still. That evening I called Lenora. She answered after the third ring, her voice tired. "I saw it," she said. "They told me T was temporary." "They're lying, I know." She didn't say anything for a moment, then she added, "Cynthia had a closed door meeting with 2 developers last week. Word is they're looking at repurposing part of the lower ridge into a private amenity space. Something about value-added communal features. An amenity." I said flatly. "On top of an escape route," she sighed. I voted no. So did W. and Brian. But the others, they're either bought in or too naive to see what it means. People are going to die. "I know," she whispered. I spent the next few days documenting everything. I took high-resolution photos of the barrier. I measured the fence line. I contacted the fire marshal again, this time with timestamps and GPS coordinates. I sent another round of emails to the city council, but this time I copied local reporters too. Still no answers, just a few red receipts and a "we appreciate your concern." The barrier didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the neighborhood. A few families who like to walk their dogs on the old road started asking questions. I overheard them in passing. "Didn't that used to be a trail? Why is it locked now? I thought that was supposed to be an emergency road or something." But when they reached out to the HOA, they were met with prescripted emails about community safety, unauthorized access, and perimeter stabilization. The usual deflections. Then came the letter folded in my mailbox again. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet with typed text. "Your actions are being monitored. Continued interference with HOA projects may result in legal action and revocation of resident privileges." No signature, no official letterhead, just fear printed on paper. I wasn't surprised. Intimidation was the oldest play in the book, but it didn't stop me. That weekend, I borrowed a drone from a friend in the county's emergency services department. He'd heard about my crusade and quietly offered his support. "Just be careful, Cal," he said. "They're not going to back down easy. People don't like being told they're wrong, especially when it costs them money." I used the drone to capture aerial footage of the blocked road from the ridge all the way down to where it should have met the county route. The fencing was clear, the boulders were visible, the blockage was undeniable. I posted the footage online. No commentary, no dramatic music, just the raw images labeled "former fire access Road Pine Hollow HOA barrier. Within 2 days, the video had over 10,000 views. It made its way to a few local Facebook groups. I started getting messages, some supportive, some angry, some. One resident wrote, "Thank you, I had no idea we were so vulnerable." Another said, "Why are you trying to scare everyone? Fires haven't hit this far in years." And then from someone anonymous, "Back off before you burn any more bridges," literally. The next HOA meeting was packed. People wanted answers. Cynthia showed up flanked by 2 board members and a lawyer. She opened with practice calm. "We understand there have been concerns regarding recent safety upgrades along our perimeter. Let me be clear. The HOA operates fully within its chartered authority with all necessary permits. These measures were taken to prevent trespassing, reduce liability, and preserve community aesthetics." I raised my hand. She looked at me with that polished smile. "Mr. Rowlands, we're not entertaining conspiracy theories tonight. This isn't a theory," I said. "It's a federal regulation. Blocking an emergency access route violates both local fire codes and public safety statutes." The lawyer stood. "Our assessment has found no official designation for that road on the current municipal map. That's because your landscaping team bulldozed the marker post 6 weeks ago." There was a rumble in the room. Whispers turned into voices. Someone stood up behind me. "I used that trail during the flood in '09. The man said we had to get horses out that way." Another neighbor joined in. "My cousin works for the Forestry Service. She said this is illegal." The tension in the room swelled. Cynthia tried to regain control. "Let's stay civil, please." I stepped forward. "When the fire comes, not if but when, your fences won't stop it, but they will stop people from getting out. You're not protecting anyone, you're boxing them in." There was silence, not the polite kind, the kind that creeps in before a storm hits. The meeting adjourned with no resolution, just angry voices and broken trust. That night, as I walked home under the dry stars, I looked back once more at the ridge line. The fencing gleamed dully in the moonlight. The concrete posts stood like tombstones. I stopped at the edge of the blocked road, rested my hand on the top wire, and whispered to no one, "You better pray it rains this summer." But I knew it wouldn't. It was the kind of morning you'd never suspect. July 28th, clear sky, not a cloud in sight. The sun came up blood orange, filtered through summer haze, and the air smelled faintly of pine sap and dust. I was out back trimming the edge of my garden, not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. My nerves had been off for days. Something in the wind had changed. It was around 10 to 42 a.m. when I saw the first smudge of gray above the northern ridge. Thin at first, wispy, like a smoldering campfire gone unattended. I watched it for exactly 7 seconds before I dropped my clippers and grabbed my binoculars from the shed wall. When I focused, the plume was already billowing, thickening, turning from smoke to smoke, that dark, oily gray that only comes from dry brush and too much heat. It wasn't someone's barbecue, it was wildfire. The wind was blowing east, but it was shifting. I could see the way the treetops trembled the direction they leaned. A southeast drift would bring the flames straight toward Pine Hollow, and fast. I ran inside, grabbed my radio. It was old, but it still tapped into the fire dispatch band. Static buzzed until a call came through. Report of ignition near what mile marker? 112. Ridge top. Rapid spread, wind driven. All units responding. My hand tightened around the device. I knew that stretch. It was 5 mi. From us, maybe less, as the crow flies. With the dry fuel bed we had this year, that fire could be licking at our perimeter by late afternoon. I sent a group message to a few neighbors. I trusted people who'd attended the HOA meeting, who'd quietly voiced concern. "There's a fire on the North Ridge. Spread rate looks fast. Prepare to evacuate. Do not wait for the HOA to alert." Then I opened my garage and started packing. By 11:30, I'd filled 2 duffel bags, emergency gear, backup chargers, bottled water, headlamps, documents. I loaded the old Jeep, checked the fuel, double-checked the radio. Outside, the sky was already dulling. A gray filter rolled over the sun like a shutter. Closing, somewhere to the west, a siren wailed. I stepped back out onto my deck, just in time to hear the first HOA announcement, a root call sent to every resident. Attention Pine Hollow residents, the HOA has received word of a small fire outside the development. Local authorities have not issued an evacuation. Please remain calm and await further instructions. Do not use unauthorized access routes. I laughed loud and bitter. Unauthorized access routes. They meant my road, the one they'd fenced off, chained shut, and paved over with landscaping stones. Within an hour, the fire doubled in size. Smoke crept along the canyon's edge like a beast unfurling its spine. Ash began falling, tiny gray flecks drifting like snow. I watched them stick to the windshield of my Jeep, soft and silent. And deadly. Around 100 p.m. I heard commotion down the street. People dragging bins, loading cars. A few residents were standing in their driveways looking up at the ridge. I jogged down and caught sight of Cynthia, standing by her luxury SUV, phone in hand. Looking uncertain, for the first time I'd ever seen her. Still think it's a small fire? I asked, approaching. She looked up sharply. They haven't issued mandatory evacuation yet. They will. It's not coming this way. Yes, it is. Wind shifting. She opened her mouth to argue, then paused, watching the sky. There was a distant crack like a dry branch snapping in a hollow chamber. I knew that sound. A tree falling in flame. What's the plan for evacuation? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She blinked. We use the main road. That's the route. What if it clogs? She hesitated. I warned you, I said quietly. You fenced off the only other option. Her lips parted, maybe to deny it, maybe to deflect. But at that moment someone came running from the cul-de-sac. The road's blocked. There's a crash. Two cars hit each other trying to turn out. Panic spread like embers in wind. People started shouting. A mother clutched her toddler, looking around like she didn't know where she was. I turned back toward my house, shouting over my shoulder, follow me if you want out. We're using the fire road. It's the only way now. There was a beat, just one, and then people began running. I sprinted back through my yard, cut through the pine hedge, and stood before the barrier they'd built, the same fence I'd warned them about, the concrete posts, the triple wound wire, the padlocked gate. Behind me, a dozen people were now gathering. More were coming down the slope, cars abandoned, children crying. And above us, the sky had turned rust-cold, heavy with ash and dread. I grabbed a bolt cutter from the back of my Jeep. The lock snapped on the third try. I yanked the chain through, opened the gate, and started pulling rocks by hand. Another man joined me, then two more. We dug out just enough of a path to get through on foot, wide enough for strollers, carts, elderly arms leaning on younger ones. The air tasted like burning plastic somewhere. Sirens screamed. I didn't hear the robot calls anymore, just chaos. Move, ISH. Outed. Waving people forward. Single files stay close to the left. The slope drops off to the right. We led them past the barrier and down the old gravel road. The one nobody thought mattered. The one I'd walked 100 times in silence, memorizing every bend, every soft shoulder, every jutting rock. Now it was saving lives. Halfway down the trail, I looked back. Cynthia was there. She wasn't leading. She was following, stumbling. Her mascara streaked her pink blouse stained with sweat. She caught my eye and faltered. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, because behind us the ridge was burning, and I knew we had miles to go before it caught us. The smoke thickened faster than I expected. By the time we reached the lower bend in the access road, visibility had dropped to 30 ft. The canyon echoed with sirens from every direction. County fire engines trying to reach us from the main highway, paramedics calling out through bullhorns, but they were miles away and the roads were choking with cars. Panic was a living thing now. You could see it in people's eyes, hear it in the rasp of their breathing. We had 72 people on that road. I counted them as they passed the break in the fence. Elderly couples, teenagers dragging coolers, a woman in labor, a boy holding a rabbit cage to his chest like it was made of glass, and behind us, Pine Hollow was unraveling. The official evacuation route, the one the HOA had insisted was sufficient, had collapsed within minutes. Two cars had clipped each other at the intersection, creating a chain of stalled vehicles that couldn't move forward and couldn't reverse. No emergency crews could get in. No one could get out. People abandoned their cars and ran back uphill, only to find the trail they'd once ignored was now their last hope. They came in waves, stumbling, crying, coughing through shirts tied across their faces. The HOA was nowhere. No leadership, no coordination. Cynthia and her inner circle had vanished, gone quiet after their plans dissolved into chaos. It was the people, the ones they dismissed, who stepped up. A teenager from Elm Street ran ahead with a flashlight to guide families past the rockfall. Lenora, bless her heart, took the arm of every senior who hesitated and walked beside them. I barked orders, pointed out footing, called out turns in the trail. I became what I'd tried not to be anymore, the guy in charge when the world caught fire. At one point near the old washout curve, we heard it. A roar like a freight train, the crackle of timber exploding. Someone screamed, "It's here." I turned and saw it, flame cresting the ridge behind us, 50 feet high, whipped sideways by wind. An orange wall sweeping downhill, devouring everything in its path. The sky glowed like the inside of a furnace, and then from up the hill came more people running, shouting. One man carried his dog under his coat. Another helped a child who twisted her ankle. The heat came with them, a wave that hit like a punch. I shouted, "Keep moving, don't stop." They surged forward, and I stepped off the trail to make room, my feet sinking into loose gravel. A woman clutched my jacket as she passed, eyes wide with terror. "Are we going to make it?" I looked at her, soot on her cheeks, her child pressed to her side. "Yes," I said, "but only if you don't stop." The trail bent again, this time downward toward the creek bed. I knew the slope would level out after the final rise. That was our breakpoint, the place where the trail opened into the clearing that led to County Route 17. I could see the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off the highway guardrail through the smoke. But there was one more obstacle about 20 yards ahead. The trail was blocked again, this time by a section of fencing the landscaping crew had begun to install, but never finished. It was half done, poorly secured, a mess of wire and rebar, driven into the soil like someone gave up halfway. "Help me tear it down," I called. 3 men ran forward. One brought a tire iron. Another had a garden rake. We pulled at the wires, ripped them free from the earth. I kicked at one of the posts until it cracked and fell sideways. And then the wind shifted again. It blew hard and low, and with it came a blast of ember and smoke. Sparks swirled around us like fireflies. Trees above us ignited. Someone screamed. "Go," I shouted. "We've got it, get them through." We funneled them past the broken fence down into the clearing. I could see fire trucks flashing in the distance, blue and red lights winking through the gray. They'd reached the county road. We were minutes away. As the last of the group passed through, I scanned behind us and saw Cynthia. She was still halfway up the slope, limping. Her left hand was pressed to her thigh, and her eyes were wild with pain and disbelief. I ran to her. She flinched when she saw me, like she expected me to yell or leave her behind. Instead, I grabbed her arm. "Lean on me now." She didn't argue, couldn't. She was shaking too hard to speak. Her blouse was scorched at the sleeve, and her face was streaked with sweat and ash. We half hobbled, half slid down the rest of the path. The fire was so close now I could hear it breathing, a deep, hungry sound that swallowed everything else. When we broke through to the clearing, cheers rose from the others. Paramedics were waiting. They rushed forward with blankets, oxygen, and stretchers. People collapsed, others wept, some just stared in stunned silence at the smoke rising behind the trees. I handed Cynthia off to an EMT and stepped back, breath-heaving hands raw. Someone asked my name. I told them. Another handed me water. I drank. Then I looked back up the trail past the broken fence at the land we just crossed, a place the HOA had wanted to bury under boulders and mulch, and I whispered, "You still think that road was an eyesore?" Cynthia looked up from her stretcher. Our eyes met. For the first time, she didn't have anything to say. That silence meant more than any apology, because the truth was undeniable now. We'd been trapped, but we'd made it out because of a road they tried to erase. The next morning, I woke to sirens still echoing in the valley, distant but persistent, a mechanical lament that matched the dull ache in my chest. I hadn't slept. No one had, not really. We'd spent the night in the emergency shelter at the Palm County Rec Center. Gymnasium transformed into a mess of CS, plastic bins, children's toys, and the rustling silence of too many people trying not to break down. I sat on a folding chair near the back wall, staring at the walls and waiting for the inevitable. The questions, the damage assessments, the accusations, the apologies that might never come. Someone handed me a styrofoam cup of coffee I didn't remember asking for. I sipped it, still tasting smoke in my throat. Across the room, I saw Cynthia, her leg wrapped in gauze, sitting alone on a cot. She wasn't crying, but the way she stared at the floor told me everything. She looked like someone who had finally realized the cost of her decisions and how little control she'd ever had over the real world outside her bylaws. I didn't approach her, not yet. There was no satisfaction in it. Instead, I waited for the call I knew was coming. It came at 7:42 a.m. A local fire inspector named Bales, whom I knew from my time in the service, called my cell directly. He didn't waste time. "Rollins, we've contained 70%, burned through 2 canyons and jumped the North Service Ridge. Your side held thanks to wind shift. Good call on the access road. We tracked 70-plus evacuees coming out through there. Any losses?" I asked, voice low. "Structural only. No fatalities, too. Minor injuries." If that road hadn't been there, he didn't finish. I hung up, rubbed my eyes, and exhaled hard. Relief didn't come. Not yet. By noon, the evacuation order for Pine Hollow was lifted for half the development. Homes on the western side were intact. The main road had reopened, though parts of it were scorched black and littered with melted reflectors. My house, a bit charred at the edges, one gutter warped, had survived, but the fence gone. I found it just after I returned. The triple wound wire had curled and melted. In the heat, the posts had snapped or shifted, some uprooted completely. The padlock I'd cut was a lump of scorched steel in the gravel. All of it lay twisted and blackened, as if the fire itself had come down hungry and furious and swallowed the monument to ignorance the HOA had built. But even before the flames took it, I had torn that barrier down. I hadn't waited for permission. I hadn't waited for approval or validation. I saw people about to be trapped, and I acted not as a vigilante, not as a rebel, as someone who knew better, someone who had lived this before. I climbed back up the ridge that afternoon, boots crunching over ash and stone, walking the trail we'd used to escape. The trees here were singed bark, blistered but still standing. In places, the fire had kissed the ground and moved on fast and light. In others, it had lingered, reducing logs to bone white husks and turning mulch into hot charcoal. I stopped where the boulders had once stood. 3 of them had rolled downhill, loosened by the heat, and slope now lodged at odd angles in the underbrush. One lay cracked open, heat split from within like the mountain itself had rejected it. I saw Lenora halfway up the slope. She was wearing gloves, carrying a clipboard, her face tired but determined. "You came back," she said, voice. "I had to see it." She nodded, eyes scanning the ridge. "We were lucky." "No, we were prepared," I corrected, "or at least I was." She looked at me, and for a second I saw regret but also resolve. "I've already filed a motion with the city," she said, "emergency injunction to halt all future HOA projects along this corridor. The mayor's office wants a full investigation." Fire marshal's writing his report now. I said nothing. Just let the wind move between us softer. "Now Cynthia's stepping down," she added. That made me pause voluntarily. "Not exactly. Let's just say the neighborhood saw what happened and they've had enough." Good, I thought, but part of me didn't care anymore. I bent down and picked up one of the melted pieces of fencing. Twisted in black, it barely held its shape. I turned it in my hand. This, I said, quietly, should never have been here. Lenora didn't argue. I want the road restored, I said, the whole thing. Graded, cleared, marked with signage. Emergency pullouts every quarter mile. Solar lights, a lockbox for emergency. Cruz, I'll back you, she said, and I think you'll have a lot of support now. I looked around at the charred brush. The still smoking roots, the silence left behind. It shouldn't take fire to make people listen. No, it shouldn't. She agreed, but now they will. I spent the next few days meeting with fire officials, zoning representatives even. 2 journalists who showed up to interview survivors. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them what the HOA had done and how many warnings had been ignored. I didn't tell them I'd almost given up, that I'd almost just let the whole thing slide into bureaucracy and silence, that I'd almost said, let them deal with the consequences. Instead, I told them the truth, that a single blocked road could kill a neighborhood, that being in compliance doesn't mean being prepared, and that sometimes you have to tear the barrier down literally before it's too late. The final image that stayed with me from those days wasn't the fire. It wasn't even the road. It was the face of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, who clutched her rabbit cage to her chest as she ran down the gravel trail, breathing hard, blinking through tears. At the bottom, when the EMTs took her hand, she looked back at me and she smiled. That one smile, it made everything worth it. Even the ash, even the fight, even the part of me I had to dig back out. When darkness fell over Pine Hollow, it didn't come gently. The sky was already dimmed by smoke and ash. But as night truly settled in, the weight of what we'd all survived came down like a blanket, soaked in fear and fatigue. The fire was mostly contained by then, though still burning on distant rigil lines, visible only in the faint red glow beyond the horizon, like coals under the skin of the mountain. The emergency crews were rotating out. The firefighters I knew, tired men and women with soot-streaked faces, gave nods as they passed, some recognizing me from years ago. They didn't say much. None of us needed to. We had been in that rhythm before, post-crisis, mid-exhaustion, hearts still clenched and heads full of smoke. I couldn't sleep. Not in the shelter, not at home, not anywhere. My body was too wired, my muscles sore from effort and adrenaline, so I walked. Around 2:00 a.m. I found myself back at the ridge trail, now cleared and silent, barely lit by the moon, filtering through haze. The access road looked like a scar, blackened in places, dirt kicked up fence. Posts collapsed like fallen soldiers, but it was there, still there. And I realized something I hadn't dared acknowledge earlier. We'd gotten every single person out, not a life lost, not a single fatality. The wind had shifted just enough. The barriers had broken just in time. The community, disorganized, frightened, completely untrained, had still managed to save itself, mostly because a handful of people refused to sit quietly. That trail, that ugly gravel road, had become our lifeline. I sat on a boulder near the bend where we'd torn through the last stretch of fencing. The metal there had melted into jagged ribbons curled like snakes. A crushed plastic lawn sign bearing the Pine Hollow HOA logo had blown into the brush. I picked it up, turned it over, and laughed quietly. Pride, peace, progress. It read 3 words that meant nothing in the face of fire. I was still sitting there when footsteps crunched behind me. I turned and saw Lenora bundled in a raincoat, a flashlight swinging from her hand. She looked surprised to find me out there, but not too surprised. I thought I might find you here, she said, voice low. Couldn't sleep, I replied. Me neither. She sat beside me without asking. We were both quiet for a moment. The air was colder now, crisp, even through the lingering smoke. They want you to speak, she said eventually. Who? The neighborhood, the board, the news. Everyone, really. I shook my head. I didn't do anything special. That's not true. You saved them. I saved us. Barely. She smiled, not condescendingly, but like someone who saw through all the armor. Sometimes barely is more than enough. Another long silence passed before I asked, how bad is it really? About a third of the perimeter. Landscaping is gone. The HOA files, most of them survived. Some homes have. Smoke damage. A few fences melted. But the worst hit was the community's. Illusion of control. I looked at her. The illusion, she said again, slower. That Hey, were safe because they had rules. That appearances meant protection. That blocking a road could. Never block a fire. She was right, and she knew it now. I read your packet, she added. The original fire zoning plans. The maps from '98. You were right about everything. I didn't want to be. No, but thank God you were. We sat there for what felt like hours. She eventually rested her head against the boulder behind us, closing her eyes. I listened. To the wind. It didn't feel angry anymore, just tired. And then came the headlights. 2 trucks rolled slowly up. The lower trail, city workers with flashing amber lights. They parked near the bend, got out and began unspooling. Hazard tape. One of them approached us. Your Roland's right, he asked. Yeah, he handed me a clipboard. We're here to mark the trail as an emergency access route per the mayor's orders. Your name's on the citation request. You've been assigned temporary trail supervisor status until formal designation's completed. I blinked at him. What does that mean? Means you're in charge of making sure this doesn't get covered up again. I didn't answer, just signed the clipboard. Lenora smiled faintly. Guess you're officially back in service. Not sure that's good news, I said, though. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something settle like a puzzle piece, finally sliding into place. After they left, I stood and stretched, joints popping, knees stiff from sitting too long. Lenora stayed behind, watching the workers mark off the trail with reflective flags and new signage posts. I walked slowly down the gravel path, letting my boots scuff the surface, remembering every footstep from the evacuation, every scream, every hand that clutched mine, every second spent wondering if the fire would beat us to the bend. At the base of the trail, just beyond the creek, I noticed something new. A small wooden bench placed under the shade of a surviving oak. A plaque was mounted on it. For those who watch and wait and act, no name, no dedication. Just that. I sat there for a while. Let the quiet fill me. Let the memories settle where they belonged, and thought about what came next. In the weeks that followed, the flames receded, but the fire wasn't done with us. It never is. The kind that rips through your town doesn't just blacken trees and scorch rooftops. It gets inside people. It lingers in the way they hold their breath when the wind shifts, in the flinch at sirens, in the silence that falls when someone mentions next time. In Pine Hollow, it had been changed not just by smoke or charred fences, but by truth. The morning after the fire, I received a formal letter from the All-Mayor's office, delivered by hand. It was printed on heavy cardstock and began with all the usual words. Our deepest gratitude, heroism, community, resilience. But tucked at the bottom, under a block of formal citations, was the line that meant something. In light of your actions, the city of Oskalora recognizes the Pine Hollow Ridge Fire Access Road as a protected emergency corridor under Municipal Ordinance 17. Effective immediately, the road will be maintained and preserved as critical evacuation infrastructure. Any obstruction shall be considered a public safety violation. It felt like justice, not the flashy kind, but the quiet, solid kind that comes with ink and signatures and law. I framed the letter and hung it in my front hallway next to my old fire captain badge, not out of pride but as a promise. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled. Their president, Cynthia Brower, officially resigned 3 days after the fire. She posted a brief message in the community newsletter. After deep reflection and in the spirit of accountability, I am stepping down from my position as president of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. My intention was always to serve the community, and I hope future leadership will continue to prioritize safety and transparency. No apology, no admission, just a quiet exit wrapped in PR gloss. But the neighborhood wasn't interested in polite closure. They were angry and they were loud. I didn't expect to be invited to the emergency town hall, but I was. The new interim board president, a former Navy pilot named Charles, came to my door personally. We need you. There, Cal, he said. People need to hear from the one guy who didn't just talk about the fire. You did something. I didn't want the spotlight. I didn't want the applause, but I knew what fear sounded like when it didn't have direction, so I showed up. The rec center was packed wall to wall, standing room only, local press in the back, fire marshals up front. The room hummed with the kind of tension that doesn't break until someone names it. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the people I'd lived beside, many of whom had once dismissed me as paranoid or disruptive. And I told the truth. I told them about the years I spent in the fire service, the things I'd seen, the lives I'd failed to save, the patterns that repeatedly key cruel seasons. I explained how wildfires don't obey rules, how they don't stop to read covenants or bylaws, how they move on wind and opportunity, and how blocking an exit, even just one, could turn a survivable fire into a mass casualty event. I didn't name names. I didn't shame anyone, but I held the mirror up. At the end, a woman stood and asked, "What can we do to make sure this never happens again?" "Listen," I said. "Listen when someone sounds the alarm, even if it's uncomfortable, especially." Then the applause was hesitant at first. Then it built, but I didn't stay for the full meeting. I left after giving the city council my notes and GPS-tagged maps. On the way out, a teenager I recognized from the evacuation trail caught up with me. "You saved my sister," he said. "She was the one with a rabbit." "Thank you," I nodded. It was all I could do. In the following days, lawsuits started, small ones at first. Property damage liability claims, but they grew. A group of homeowners filed a class action against the former board, citing negligence and obstruction of public safety infrastructure. City attorneys began investigating the zoning irregularities that had allowed the fencing to be built. It turned out one of the permits had been signed by a friend of Cynthia's, rushed through, without proper environmental review. There would be hearings, depositions, likely settlements, but for once the process felt like it was moving in the right direction. One morning, I got a call from Chief Morales. He told me the department wanted to name the trail officially after the incident, something that could appear on future evacuation maps and public signage. We were thinking the Roland's emergency egress route, he said, half teasing. "No," I replied. "Call it the Pot Ridge Trail." "Huh, that's what it's always been," he chuckled. "You sure? Names fade," I said. "Stories last longer," the city agreed. Within 2 weeks, new signs went up. Ridge Trail, emergency exit, do not obstruct. Fire department access route. They added solar markers, installed emergency kiosks at each turn. Kids on bikes started riding it again. Some neighbors used it for walks in the early evening, waving when they saw me. And bit by bit the fear eased. Not vanished, never vanished, but replaced by vigilance. Still, there were reminders. The ash ring in my garden that refused to wash away. The scorch mark on my garage door. The tree at the edge of my property, half burnt, standing like a sentinel that refused to fall. I didn't rebuild the rear fence. Instead, I placed a bench just beyond the trailhead. From there, you could see the whole ridge curve down into the valley, the route we'd taken. That day, the same one they'd once tried to seal off. I sat there most evenings now, a mug of coffee in hand, listening to the mountain breathe, watching the pines regrow inch by inch, letting the quiet come back, this time earned, not expected. Sometimes neighbors joined me one at a time. They'd sit, ask questions, offer thanks, or just look at the land in shared silence. And sometimes people brought their children. Was this the road, they'd ask, pointing? I'd nod. The very one. Did the fire come all the way here? Yes, but we made it through. They'd go quiet for a beat. Then one of them would always ask the same thing. Will it come again? And every time I told them the truth, yes, but now we'll be ready. Fall arrived quietly that year. The mountain no longer smelled of fire, but of earth-damp pine needles, charred bark slowly breaking down into soil, the breath of the land exhaling. After months of holding it in, rain came in short bursts at first, then longer, softer. The ash that clung to gutters and driveways began to wash away, revealing what was left underneath. Some homes wore their scars plainly blistered paint, warped fences, dead hedges, but others bore only the memory. Pine Hollow, for all it had endured, still stood. The ridge trail, no longer a secret, no longer dismissed, was now a part of daily life. It had been widened slightly, regraded in sections. Wooden signs marked each 4 mile. At the bottom of the trail where County Route 17 met the clearing, the city had installed a pull-out for emergency vehicles and a weatherproof kiosk with laminated maps, emergency instructions, and an old photograph of the evacuation printed on aluminum taken by a reporter's drone. In the photo, we were tiny silhouettes in a long, narrow line, a river of people walking downhill through smoke. I visited that kiosk once a week just to stand in front of it, to remember what it meant. Not just escape, but clarity. That image was the moment everything changed. When HOA policies gave way to instinct, when fear gave way to movement, when silence finally gave way to action. One morning, about a month after the last fire perimeter was declared extinguished, the city held a small ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just a gathering of residents, city council members, emergency responders, and few cameras. I almost didn't attend. I hadn't shaved. My boots were muddy. The idea of standing in front of everyone again made my stomach knot. But I showed up late, standing in the back with my arms crossed and my hat low. They unveiled a new trailhead sign, carved wood-deep letters, Ridge Trail, dedicated to the resilience of Pine Hollow. When the path was blocked, we made our own way. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about Cynthia. It wasn't about the lawsuit still crawling through the courts or the HOA board that had been entirely replaced. It was about all of us, what we chose when the flames closed. The mayor spoke briefly. So did Chief Morales. Then Lenora stepped up. She was no longer just a former board member. She was now president of the newly restructured HOA, which operated under oversight until a full audit could be completed. She looked stronger than I'd ever seen her, confident, grounded. This road, she said, was once called an eyesore, a liability, a waste of space. But when everything else failed, this was the road that saved us. This was the path we forgot we needed until one man reminded us, not with speeches but with footsteps. She looked toward this crowd. Found me? Cal Rollins didn't just reopen a road. He reopened our eyes and our responsibility to each other. I didn't step forward. I didn't wave. I just nodded once, and that was enough. After the ceremony, a few people came to shake my hand. Others just patted my shoulder as they passed. No one said too much. That was fine. Words aren't always what matter most. Later, as the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind. The trail was quiet again. I walked it from the top the way we had that day, slowly feeling the familiar give of gravel underfoot, the sound of wind threading through pine. Halfway down, I passed the bend where the fence had once stood. Nothing remained of it now. The ground was flattened, clear, open, a space reclaimed not just by fire but by truth. At the base of the trail, just beyond the creek, I noticed something new. A small wooden bench placed under the shade of a surviving oak. A plaque was mounted on it for those who watch and wait and act. No name, no dedication. Just that. I sat there for a while, let the quiet fill me, let the memories settle where they belonged, and thought about what came next. In the months that followed, Pine Hollow changed. The HOA implemented new emergency protocols. Annual evacuation drills, fire awareness workshops, the kind of things that once felt excessive, now taken seriously. The board met monthly, and this time residents attended. A few of the old guard tried to make noise, complaining about overreach, about loss of aesthetic control, but their voices were quieter now, outnumbered by people who had seen what ignorance costs. As for me, I did something I hadn't done in years. I rejoined the volunteer fire council, not in uniform, not on the front line, but as an advisor, someone who could help map routes, assess hazards, and train the next generation on what we learned the hard way. I spoke at 2 high schools, gave 3 interviews, even did a podcast. I hated every second of being in front of a microphone, but I did it because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to warn, and someone needs to show the way out when it all goes dark. One evening in early winter, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single note on lined paper. You were right, thank you for not giving up on us, CB. I stared at the initials for a long time, folded the letter, tucked it into the back of my old binder, the one with the maps, the warnings, the history of a trail that once meant nothing to everyone but me. Now it belonged to all of us, and it was open, wide open. Forever,